Welcome to the Retro Adventurers. I am Jason Compton. With me this episode is Nick Moffat. And Nick, we are going to do something that I wish there were more opportunities to do, but we're going to talk about a couple of Shakespeare-themed and inspired games this episode. We've got Macbeth, we've got Avon. First of all, Nick, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm going to open with an apology. As you know, if you've been listening to the Retro Adventurers for a while, our format is that we take on what we call a main course game and an appetizer game. And I chose Macbeth as our appetizer game. And it's not exactly an appetizer game. I saw that it was a four-part, kind of single load game. And I'm like, well, there can't be too much going on here. There's a lot going on in Macbeth. So our appetizer is going to be a little heavier. It's more, the metaphor I came up with, it's more like some restaurants will have, the list of their appetizers. Maybe they've got 10 appetizers on there. And then they'll have like the combo platter that's like $60 and you get 8 of their 10 appetizers. So Macbeth is more of that type of appetizer. So I apologize for the heavy load on here. But first, had you had any experience with either Macbeth or Avon before you got the call to do this episode?
I had not worked with either one. I think I had heard rumors of Avon, like it was infamous in some circles, but I hadn't ever actually played it or even looked at any of the browsies.
Yeah, and that game came from Topologika, which grew out of a university tradition. Had you played any of the Topologika games, or is this your absolute first time?
No, this was my first Topologika game.
Yeah, same here as well. I remember when they were first being kind of preserved and brought into the turn of the millennium, through some preservation efforts, that it was the first I had heard of them as well. And the general word on them was that they were extremely difficult. And as I'm somewhat of we'll say a middle of the road at best adventurer, I'd sort of let them lay. But as I've been looking at the retro scene, it struck me more and more how interesting it is that relatively few games were based on Shakespearean stories. And I say that because there were plenty of games that were developed off of literary properties. One we've already covered here, Swiss Family Robinson. So once we, identified that there really were a couple of, mainstream commercial releases that were in that Shakespearean tradition, we thought we'd take a look. And the first one is Macbeth. Nick, I would like to first say some factual things about Macbeth before we get into the opinion portion. So it is a fact that Macbeth was developed only for the Commodore 64, which is a little bit of a historical oddity. It is a fact that it was first released on tape in the UK and later brought to the US on a disc release from Avalon Hill. It's a fact that it is a 4-part adventure. What are some other facts that we could share, Nick?
Gosh, it is a fact that it's a mix of both graphical and pure text games. In those 4 parts, 2 of them are graphical and 2 of them are text. I would say it's a fact that the 2 text games are under a time limit and that events occur in real time that you need to react to.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's got sound effects
Yes.
and little musical interludes at times.
Yes, indeed.
It's a fact that you play a different protagonist in them. In parts 1, 3, and 4, you are the Thane of Cawdor, Macbeth himself. In episode 2, you are Lady Macbeth. Oh, do you have a different
that's
view?
interesting. I mean, perhaps I didn't read that closely enough. I assumed that in 3 that I was one of the Weird sisters.
I think that's plausible. Yeah. I do think that's
Yeah.
plausible.
Okay.
It's not as clear as it could be. We'll talk more about episode 3. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It's a fact that the protagonist's point of view changes anyway. Part 1, it's sort of events that happen before the play begins. That you're fighting off MacDonwald and Swino of Norway. Episode 2 is Lady Macbeth putting the murder plot in action. Part 3 is gathering up all of the different herbs and spices and artifacts for the witch's brew. And then episode 4 is the kind of the final confrontation between Macbeth and Macduff as he's defending the largely abandoned castle. He only has a Seton there to still help him. We'll talk about how it is a fact that the game does let you change Macbeth's fate at the end. Other facts I want to share before we get into the opinion portion?
Ooh, let's see. What else can we think of here? It is a fact that the game occasionally requires some verbs from Shakespeare himself.
That
from
is
the
a
play.
fact. Yes,
Yeah?
yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a fact that the game has a relatively pleasant error message. So instead of just saying, I don't know what you mean, it would reprint what you had typed in with the part it didn't understand colored red, which I
Yes,
thought
and
was, given the rest of the parser, I thought that was reasonably advanced.
yeah, Dave mentioned that on a previous episode. I haven't had a chance to go back and look at that, but yeah, he mentioned that as a convention that he thought was fairly common. This was one of the first times that I'd encountered it. I think Valhalla may have done that as well. That may have been the episode where we discussed that convention. That was interesting. I didn't find well, this starts to bridge into opinion, but it is a fact that I didn't necessarily find that highlighting as helpful as I would have liked because sometimes, yeah, I was telling you this is where I stopped parsing, but it might have meant that a linking word, preposition wasn't quite what it expected. I would say that I guess this bridges between opinion and fact, but I think it's a fact. There's not a lot of synonym support in this. In
Correct.
fact, some of the adventures did not support both take and get. That was a bit of a thing.
Yes, I would say that it's also a fact that there's a certain amount of inconsistency between even the parts of the games. Things that would work
Yes.
functionally and acceptably in part one wouldn't work in part two, and then part three would be different in other ways.
Yes.
I would say it's also a fact that very few objects in this game have descriptions.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yeah, those are all good facts. I think I'd like to move to the opinion portion now, if I may.
Well, I have opinions about this game, I'll tell you that.
I have not been this angry about a game since episode one, The Pawn. And I don't like going in with the idea that we're gonna, rip on these games or rank on them. I really want to enjoy and say nice things about what we're playing. But boy, did this game make me mad, and for very similar reasons. How did you find it, Nick?
I found it absolutely frustrating. And I think that you and I both hit the situation where, I mean, I tend to approach these games where I want to first experience them as someone getting them fresh would have played them and experienced them, which generally means I read the manual, the browsies, all of that stuff. I then start the game up and just play with it and see what comes out of it for a little while. And generally, because obviously we're doing this to a deadline, I'll dive into hints fairly readily and I'll look for walkthroughs if that doesn't get me as far as I like. And in this case, I had to go to the walkthrough fairly quickly. I think we found the same walkthrough through different paths, and it just wasn't enough. It just didn't give me any sense. Even when I was completing the parts that could be completed, I didn't I didn't leave with a sense that I understood now how I was meant to play the game.
Yeah.
It really felt like it required me to guess the intent of the creator far more than your usual sort of guess the verb type complaint about a text game.
And this does take guess the verb to an extreme. I guess I should act. It is a fact that the game did come with a full length both copy of Macbeth, the original text, as well as a lot of essays and support material. That was a nice thing. I think that helped justify the £15 original price, which was rather high for a UK release of the Commodore 64 in 1984. And that text is referred to in some of the in-game help, which does exist
Mm-hmm.
and was in fact helpful. But I would say there's a real theme running through this of the creators taking the Shakespearean text extremely literally. And in part, that would mean wanting very literal text to be relayed, from the play script into the game. And in other places, that meant that story elements were applied extremely literally.
Mm.
And like the best early example of that is in that episode one, when you are trying to get rid of the rebel McDonwald. You cannot like just kill him with a knife, and the game addresses this. Like, he's far too mighty to just kill with a knife. And once you get an axe from somebody else, you go up to him, and if you try to kill him with an axe, it still rebuffs that attempt. You have to go to the original text and find where I believe it is the bloody sergeant who relates that Macbeth unseamed
Unseen.
MacDonald with an axe, and that indeed is what you have to tell the game. That's a bit frustrating.
Quite.
And as far as that solution goes, I will, I've said this in past episodes, and I will say it again. I very readily go to maps and walkthroughs and solutions and videos for these, and give a particular tip of the cap to the fine folks at solutionarchive.com. And it's notable that in the solution for this game, it's full of disclaimers that are unusual for that site, where
Mm.
they're like, we really had a super tough time getting through this. It took like 5 of us to figure out all the things we had to do. We're not even sure why some of this worked. That's unusual. Usually, even the most obtuse adventures, they're like, hey, we got through this and we had a good time doing it. This game is an exception.
It also seems that the people doing the walkthrough uncovered enough bugs that leads me to conclude, and I am, supposing here, that this game was not very heavily tested.
It
So,
has that feel. Yeah.
yeah, in addition to the fact that it's frustrating and difficult to play, it seems like there are many conditions when you get advanced enough in the game where it simply stops working.
That I did not run into the bugs as much as were mentioned. It does seem like there were at least two editions of this because, and
Yeah.
I think we talked about this a little bit in the prep for the game. In episode one, there is a magic. Well, in one place it's called a newspaper. In the version I played, it's called a scroll
Right.
that you can read, and it kind of gives you little real-time updates on the game's events as you go through. But yeah, in one place it's referred to as a newspaper, another scroll. So there may have been some touch up done. One thing that's a little bit of a parallel between the two games that we played for this episode, although the source code for the game is not available, I did go in very early just to poke around in memory, and this game doesn't have any text compression in memory, which I think is one of the reasons why I think it didn't really have to span four different single loads the way that it did, but because it was written fairly inefficiently. Most games of the period that were really serious about it, they were packing words down into like 5 bits would represent a single character so they could pack more strings together. So you can go in if you know what you're doing in a Vice emulator or on a real 64 with a freezer cart. You can go in and you can see all of the verbs and nouns that are supported. And there's kind of clues that I think the people who solved the game had to do that, because then you see like, all right, well, it's some combination of this relatively short list of verbs and nouns. Like I said, there's very little synonym support. So once you see, all right, well, unseen is here, I guess that's what they're looking for. Oh, look, here's why and how that would be. I think that's part of how they pieced that together. But even with that, so let's just talk through game one real quick. That's kind of
Sure.
that first phase of Macbeth's adventures. It's sort of a fictionalized account of what he might have been doing, stomping around. They made the curious decision. It looked like they were trying to have it be sort of a ramp up for novice players, where instead of cardinal direction support, you could only go forward or backward, which it makes sort of sense. But then you could go up and down. They did this weird trick with, there are two doors here. One is fair and one is foul, and they can't both be open at the same time. And at that point, I think just north, south, east, and west would have been better. How did you find your adventure through part one, which was kind of that blend of most locations had graphics. There would be some customized images that would come up when you put MacDonald's head on the battlements. It actually showed the severed head in 64's 160 by 200 graphics mode. How'd you find it?
Well, I mean, I found it perplexing, obviously, because I got baffled very early on what was going on. I was expecting, once I saw some of the solutions come up in the walkthrough, I thought, oh, I get it. This is sort of like, if you remember playing Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, right? The whole point of those games was that the game itself was rather small, had a few, location images for color and animations for sort of color of what's going on. But really the bulk of the data was in the almanac that shipped with it, right? And I thought,
Right.
oh, I get it. They're doing that, but with the Shakespeare text. So maybe I'm just missing the clues that tell me to go and look for the Bloody Sergeant's account of what happened to Donwald, how Macbeth slew this foe. And I didn't quite understand. I just didn't catch. Never could find that connection. I never could find exactly where it could have told me or given me any direction. Go here and find it in the text. And then as it goes further and further along, it gets more mystical and it relies on folklore, none of which is mentioned in any of the materials I could find. Things like the mysticism of a Manx cat, for example, a cat with no tail.
Yeah.
And
That
and
was a
then
really literal treatment. That one of the witches mentions, like a rat without a tail, I'll do, I'll do, I'll do. And you're supposed to just say like, oh, okay, that means I need the
that
cat
is
without a tail.
quite a stretch.
It really was.
And I have to say, even after going through the tutorial and reaching what ostensibly is the end, the only way you actually can tell that it's the end is, I guess, there's this newspaper / scroll that keeps changing the text with whatever the current situation is. And the tutorial says, look, if you read the scroll now, you'll see that it says that you were successful in the same way that Act 1 of the play describes it.
Right.
And at that point, I don't know, I was waiting for another musical fanfare. And may I quickly break in to mention that the thing that made me laugh when this started up was that, of course, it plays Amazing Grace with a sort of drone voice
Yes.
behind it in the multi-voice SID chip, so that it sounds like Amazing Grace being played on the bagpipes.
Right.
And you have to wonder, okay, this is a 17th century play about 11th century Scotsman. And that's a 19th century American hymn. So why is it that Amazing Grace is being played on the bagpipes? And the only connection that anyone can find, and this is what I immediately suspected, is that there is a funeral in space in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, to sort of give it that nautical feel. It's sort of like a burial at sea. And in that funeral, Scotty is playing Amazing Grace on the bagpipes as sort of diegetic music. And that eventually swells and becomes part of the soundtrack for that scene. So I have to believe that this probably ties in with our previous episode about Star Trek, in the sense that that was most likely the inspiration for that piece appearing in this game.
Yeah, and that would have been the most recent film, Star Trek film that was out at the time, if they were developing this in '84 when the third film came out. But yeah, yeah, that was a bit of a surprising reach. Either that, or maybe these Oxford types. It was developed by Oxford Digital Enterprises, who made up of Oxford types, and they actually went on to develop quite a few games in the years that followed. But yeah, maybe it was just an in joke. All bagpipe music sounds like Amazing Grace these days. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But that was episode one, which
Yeah.
was a little disappointing, a little confusing. Then you get into episode two, which for me, like, that was the most promising one. That was the one that
Yeah.
I'd like somebody to sit down, take the map, take the puzzle structure, and do it better, do it right, do it in a way that made sense. You are Lady Macbeth. Like you had mentioned, this is one that plays out in real time. There's an actual hour-long timer on it. And the king is coming, so you're trying to prepare the welcome for Duncan, make him feel at home, get the right people drunk, go kill him, cover up the crime, blame it on the Chamberlains, avoid detection, and get things set up so that Lord and Lady Macbeth can now become king and queen. Good concept.
Yeah. Really
Liked
promising.
liked some of the structure around it, but it quickly went off the rails for me because, unfortunately, there's a quirky puzzle, and the only reason I can think of to explain this is that I think they may have been running out of memory because, like I said, there's no text compression, and this one's a relatively heavy on locations. So you are presented with an herb garden with 5 herbs in it, and you find recipe books that help you make the stirrup cup that he's going to want, and then poison, and then antidote for the poison, and so on and so forth. But instead of referring to the herbs by their name, which are given both in the documentation for the UK edition, the US edition did not have the breakdown of the 5 plants in the same way, but in-game cookbooks talk about them by name. But mechanically in the game, they're referred to as Herb 1 through Herb 5. And again, the only reason I can think of is that they needed to save characters at the end.
Yeah.
And Herb 1 is Mandrake / Mandragora. There's a puzzle where you can't pull it by hand or it kills you on contact. The Picasa Solution Archive solution has mention of tying a rope around it, and I could not figure out what happened next. It seems to be missing. I tried different things based on the verbs that were in there. I did not get it, and so I was not able to get super far in this one because I couldn't make the stirrup cup that Duncan wanted. Where did you go south here in Lady Macbeth's adventure?
I mean, I failed at exactly the same point. I mean, I floundered around. I tried, getting the spade back out of the oven and trying
Yep.
to dig it up, and that didn't work. I tried pulling the rope. I tried seeing if maybe I needed to attach the dog to the other side of the rope.
Made the dog disappear, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And the thing is that the rope itself, the only, again, because almost nothing has descriptions, the only indication you get is when you try something and you fail, and it says that the rope is too heavy.
Yep.
Well, I mean, it was, it was lightweight enough for me to tie it around a bush. I don't understand why this is too much for me to carry. Lady Macbeth is portrayed as a strong character. Ultimately, I don't understand what this is about. And I hate to say it, you and I both ended up hitting this wall, and there's just nowhere to go. I mean, fortunately, you don't have to finish part 2 to play part 3.
Right.
And so I ended up going on to play the other 2. But I definitely felt that, especially with the time clock hanging over my head on this, it just felt like everything was pushing me away from this particular section. It really had to make a case for me to keep playing it at this point, especially in the context of this show. I just couldn't justify it anymore. I just had to walk away from that section and move on. It was really frustrating.
Yeah, it was. And again, faithful listeners out there, if any of you are interested in taking up this mantle, I would be happy to offer writing support, well, not technical support, but testing support. I'd love to see this adventure, just get a little bit of polish and a little bit of a contemporary implementation. It's a cool concept.
It's a great suspense themed story, right? I mean, it really is like, so many suspense stories that take place in a hotel, say, or something like that, where there's lots of people sleeping and you can't wake them, and there's so many people on staff around and so many resources in this facility for you to use, that from a gameplay standpoint, it just seems like it ought to work.
And it's an interesting early case of a video game themed around the actual baddies. There's a lot of talk about like, well, anything ranging from Zork to other kind of raiding and pillaging kinds of games are sort of implicitly amoral, but this one's just outright like, we are going to assassinate this king and assume power, and it's kind of just out there, and is an interesting sideline in early video game history. But because it's so difficult to play, I don't think it really got much notice, and again was never ported beyond the Commodore 64, which is unusual for the time. That a text adventure would only be on the C64, a popular platform, but definitely there were vibrant markets for this sort of thing on lots of different platforms, and it's odd that it never made it beyond. So yeah, we both got stumped on part 2 pretty early on, but based on the walkthrough, there's a lot of other interesting things going on in there. But then we get to part 3, where again, maybe you are Macbeth helping them out with their cauldron brewing. Maybe you are one of the witches, one of the weird sisters. But the quest there is to gather up all the different artifacts that again are very literally mentioned in the text. We didn't even mention that in part 1, you have to very literally cut off the pilot's thumb because that's mentioned somewhere else. Like, unfortunately, something that's very rich in metaphor gets treated very literally. But part 3, and they warn you about this in the instructions, like,
Yes.
well, part 3, this is a graphical adventure, and so you'll have to use your keen powers of observation to discern what's in the world around you. So yeah, there's a bigger area is given over to graphics. There's really just a couple lines at the bottom. Very little text, very little feedback on interaction. And all of that sounds fine, but the objects in the world sometimes literally just look like a blob, and you would have no way of knowing what it is unless you are reading the developer's minds or looking at the uncompressed text in memory, which makes it a little clearer that, oh, that little blob of white, that is a wolf's tooth. That little blob of green, that's a dragon's scale. Okay. Once you know that, it makes a little bit more sense, but with no ability, it's like a pixel hunt without the ability to click on the pixel and get the thing. You're just having to guess, what could this possibly be? And I don't know what they were thinking. Short of the objects in memory or in the walkthrough, I would have no idea what I was looking at.
Yeah, I mean, there's in one particular point, you go down into a sort of mausoleum area, and there are a couple of pillars. Everything has a sort of an Egyptian theme. Not entirely sure why. In Scotland, these cellars would have an Egyptian mausoleum, but you're basically tomb raiding a pyramid for all I can tell at that point. And there are 2 pillars with the sort of typical Egyptian palm frond capitals, and then in between, I don't know, it looks like wainscoting, paneling, a bookcase. I'm not sure, and you just have to know that that's a ladder. And you have to know that that's an object that you can take, and that even if you take it, it doesn't restrict access to the hole that appears about 3 steps up of it. So very, very confusing. I mean, it's a very compressed visual space as well because they're largely doing a lot of shape-based drawing rather than bitmap graphics, obviously. And so, yeah, definitely frustrating to also to try and work out which door you're referring to when there is no text telling you that one door leads west and one leads north. Very often you'll be in a room with a gate and a door and a stairwell, and it's incredibly frustrating. And again, I had to go back to the tutorial, back to the walkthrough, just to work out how to go sideways sometimes in this game.
Yeah, and this is the one where, in addition to warning you up front, hey, there's not going to be a lot of text in this. They also say, well, this one you won't use cardinal directions. You'll
Yeah.
have to describe where you want to go, and that's true up until it isn't. There
Yeah.
are a couple of stages where you, in fact, use the cardinal directions. So, yeah, the quality control, the consistency, it does raise the question, like, were these four developed by more or less completely different teams, just with the same kind of base parser at their beck and call? And I think that might be the case.
It really feels that way. I mean, there are some clear, like they all have the red text when the parser doesn't understand you. They all have the same sort of stained glass effect for flickering fire. And they all have, what seems to be a similar, if not identical, I mean, the two graphical ones anyway, a similar, if not identical, graphics engine for drawing the sort of shape-based graphics, sort of like The Hobbit, only a little more advanced. And yeah, it definitely feels to me that someone wrote an engine that could do text adventures with rich text and a timer, and perhaps someone else wrote something that could do the graphics, and they had to leave out a lot of the text. And then this was basically parceled out to small teams to say, why don't you write, a text adventure about this point of the play or before the play, and then you write this part. And I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Forgot to mention an inconvenience that the game had is that typically when a command was successfully processed, it would clear the screen to give you that feedback. So you would lose what you'd done, you'd lose the image on the screen. You mentioned they drew sort of fast sometimes,
Yeah.
yeah, it was unclear why you would do that, and it was obviously a deliberate choice. Not a great one.
No, but it's similar to Medea. You could also watch it progressively work through. So, for example, it would draw a cave with a big door down with a clue on it, and then that would get erased because you had already opened that gate, and then would appear the dragon, and they
Oh
would
yeah, yeah,
erase the
yeah.
dragon because you'd already
Yep.
killed that dragon, and they'd have the scale left, and then you'd already picked up the scale, so they'd erase that too, and it was just
Yeah.
you had to sit and wait for it to do 4 or 5 updates sometimes,
Yeah.
and then sometimes you'd wonder, wait a minute, is the dragon back? No, it's just still drawing.
Yeah. Oh, some other things. Yeah, this is one, episode three. Get does not work. You have to do take.
You have to use take. Yeah.
Examine stopped working. Haven't mentioned save and restore don't work because those are not an option in any of the four adventures.
I mean, they were tape-based games, so those typically didn't have much in the way of save and restore functionality.
Yeah, it would vary. You're right that it was less common to see them, but frankly, and we'll talk about episode four. But both the Lady Macbeth episode two and then the episode four, the Defense of the Castle. Like, there's a lot going on in there, and
Mm.
and they're real time, and certain events don't happen until like 30 minutes in, 50 minutes in. So that would be an extraordinarily frustrating process for a player. Never, not to mention a game tester to get through, and maybe that tips off part of what went sideways.
Yeah.
I don't know if you got to the part in episode three where you find the throne, and on the throne there's carved in gray on gray the word destiny, which looked great on a modern LCD. But as I looked at it, I'm like, this is such a fine font. I question whether this would have been readable at all on a CRT. Perhaps this game is from the future.
Oh, that's a good question. So Vice has an option in it. That's the emulator I used for the Commodore
Okay,
64.
yeah.
It has an option to turn on CRT effects to generate what it might have looked like on various displays.
Hmm.
So it gives you a bit of that sort of blur and a little bit of the sort of the NTSC or PAL color mask
Yeah.
effect. I didn't think to turn it on for this at all, which in retrospect, it probably would have been a good thing to try, at least in some of the images. But yeah, I can imagine in particular with Commodore 64, some people would have had an advanced monitor that does, the sort of RGB directly from the machine almost, or SCART level graphics, good clean signal. But almost everybody was just plugging it into a television set. And those tended to be rather noisy in terms of display. So yeah, I can imagine that gray on gray text, not great. And actually, I would like to say that the color choices for the text, particularly the text only parts of the game, the graphic ones tended to be sort of gold on dark gray, which was good enough. But there were some color choices in the text only games, 2 and 4, that I think were a little bit of a stretch for the C64 palette.
Yeah, now that you mention it, yeah, I was being perhaps spoiled a little bit by the LCD. I do have CRTs at home. I do have real C64s. I admit I did not, for this particular project, I did not whip those out. But yeah, the Vice CRT emulation might have given us a little insight there. But yeah, some of those color choices. And there's a whole kind of subgenre of arguing about the PAL colors versus the NTSC colors. Like we said, this was released in both markets. It looks like it might have been slightly updated for the US release, which is the one that I did end up playing. I played the disc version on Vice. Sounds like you played on Vice as well.
Yeah.
Were you playing the tape load or the disc load?
I was playing the disc load. Yeah.
Okay.
So
So we will next time we will both play
two
the same edition.
discs, so
Yep.
4 sides. The only thing
Yep.
I didn't get to, and again, this is partly because I spent so long banging my head against the actual game. There was on the second side of disc 2, there was access to what they called interviews. I didn't
Yes.
even open that up. Did you have a look at
Okay.
those?
I did. Let's talk about part
Let's
four,
talk
and we'll
about
talk a little
4 part.
bit
Yeah.
about the interview section. So yes, episode 3, loads of frustration. Again, very unclear how you would get through it without just looking in memory at, okay, these are all the nouns I need to track down. So sooner or later I'll find them. But episode 4, we're back to real-time activity. The forces loyal to the descendants of King Duncan and to Macduff are closing in on you. You've got to defend the castle as best you can, kind of, stave off the inevitable. You've got various assets scattered around the castle at your disposal. You've got Seaton. You can call upon him, and
Yeah.
you need his help to solve certain problems. Kind of going back to were the developers just sort of throwing in Amazing Grace as a, all bagpipe music sounds the same. I couldn't help but notice that episode 4 starts with a caber toss. I do
Yes.
kind of feel, and I am, you at least live in the United Kingdom. I've only visited, so I will not sound off in any great detail about whether Oxford types look down on the Scots, but I did notice that it starts with a caber toss.
Yes, it very much does. You are basically, you open up, there is a caber almost right there in front of you on turn 1, and you have to hurl it up onto the palisade somewhere to presumably fortify something. I don't remember exactly why, because I chuckled and moved on. And I actually stopped and I went and I looked up, wait, were there caber tosses in the 11th century? And there are medieval references to it, but they tend to be in like Sweden and England. So
Okay,
maybe,
interesting.
yeah. The word caber does come from a Scots word, I believe, but the actual practice of taking a big log and hurling it in the air seems to have been lots of places back then. Not sure, but who knows about 11th century?
There were some things that I really liked in episode 4. I would say the sense of humor that they tried to instill at different parts of the earlier adventures, like the magic newspaper, I kind of meh on. There were some other things that were attempting to be funny, haha, like maybe because I was also being frustrated by the very literal take they were putting on some things. Like for example, we didn't get to that point, but in episode 2. One of the things that Lady Macbeth apparently has to do is come up with a literal spur to give to Macbeth. And that is because in one of his soliloquies, where he's talking about maybe how he shouldn't kill Duncan, he has no spur to prick the sides of his intent. So the developers decided that we need to give him an actual spur, which is not what we meant by this.
Yeah.
So all that said, when you go up to the battlement and it describes the Burnham Wood below, it says the forest appears to be moving. It's obviously an optical illusion. I was like, thank you. That's funny.
Good.
That's a good reference.
Yeah.
Like we get it. The troops are coming, but Macbeth's like, how could that be? Thank you. Good bit. Liked it.
Yes.
You got the 60-minute timer, and it starts with Okay, when the timer flashes red, that means there's a fire. When it flashes black, that means there's soldiers in the room that are going to kill you. So it
Oh,
definitely put.
it goes more than that. There's even like if you're actually burning, then it's red and flashing, and then if there's soldiers there and you're burning, and it gives you three or four screens explaining how this timer works, and the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, I wish this game did not have this timer.
Yeah, 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 and that definitely for the final move, that really it's a rough timer. But you're going through, you're trying to basically bring a bunch of things up to the battlements so that you can throw them down on the troops. That's apparently delays them or makes them less potent or
Hmm.
ready to kill you when they eventually get into the castle. And this is all fine. But then the Shakespeare master shows up, freezes time, and starts asking you questions. My note here is Erg. Did you encounter the Shakespeare master, and would you like
Uh,
to speak about him first?
this is partly why I brought up the "where in time is Carmen San Diego" thing, because
Mm-hmm.
there are so few things you can do to bring this text together with your game. We talked about, reenact a scene from the play. They tried to do that. We would like to see someone else try that Lady Macbeth puzzle. That would be a great game for someone to do. They
Hmm.
tried to do, let's have you take part in scenes that take place before the play that are only described by side characters. And there's a few other things you can do to really try and bring the text to life. Or you can decide to break the fourth wall and have what is basically a copy protection mechanism for a public domain text, which kind of defeats the purpose. Like if this had shown up in a commercial game with a commercial book that I needed to have, that didn't exist elsewhere, I would go, right, this is the part where they're asking me to enter in, word 7 in line 24 of this verse. Like that makes sense. But when
Yeah.
this showed up and it's Shakespeare, and I'm like, ugh, I don't know. Should I go get my Folgers edition? What is this? And then, fortunately, the walkthrough had exactly what we needed. But wow, that was quite a shock.
Well, and that's the thing is, right, the document protection thing, right? What does it say on this page, this line? That's one thing. And to your point, right, even though it's a public domain text, this is 1984. There's no Project Gutenberg, there is no archive.org to go to. So sure, you could still say you bought this game, you have this book. That I could understand. I wouldn't like it, but I would understand it. The problem I had with this is that these quiz questions it's the worst example. Well, maybe not the worst because having to come up with a spur to prick the sides of Macbeth's intent was pretty bad. But this being so, just out of the moment. Again, we're not even pretending that this is really part of the game. A Shakespeare master is not a thing that would belong in Macbeth's personal story.
Just imagine if we found ourselves in exceptional times, and in the middle of an absolute crisis, a time traveler from the future comes forward and says, I am the expert of the literature of the 35th century that depicts this day. And you're just, how
Yeah,
would we possibly react to that? Would we
yeah.
actually ever get to save whatever day or cause whatever events we were part of? It just seems so bizarre.
And again, the literalness. So the question is, where is tomorrow creeping? And the answer that they are looking for is time. And the reason for that, as you just have to decode their thinking here, is that he says it creeps forth in this petty pace until the last day of recorded time. It's not a sensible question to ask. This is dumb. If you wanted to, say, turn to your neighbor and have a discussion about what this means, and then, press space bar when you've done it, fine. There's a little, one of the questions he asked, there's a graphic in which a shadow, gets up and moves away. And they said, what does this resemble? What does this represent? And the answer is life, because life's but a walking shadow is a line he says. Like again, why? No, no, that's not what we're saying. And
And
yet
I
that's
could
what
have
the game is saying.
understood if the answer had been to actually, type something directly from the passage that was a bit more
Yeah,
evocative, tomorrow and tomorrow, or something like
yeah.
that. But to just say, no, the answer is, if you distill this beautiful piece of poetry down to its essence, it's this one word at the end of the sentence. Gosh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not great.
There's other bagpipe humor. You have to kind of cobble together these makeshift bagpipes. I did like when you play them to intimidate the invading soldiers. Again, uses that same trick where it's playing warbly Sid music, chides you for being out of practice, and then the second time it's like you're actually getting worse. Again, that was funny. I did like that. Did you make it to the final showdown with
I
Macduff?
I did not because
Okay.
I realized at some point I misunderstood something about the order of operations in something involving the fire and closing certain doors and all sorts of other things. So I ended up just getting overwhelmed.
I was sticking pretty religiously to the walkthrough at this point. So yeah, if you follow the walkthrough, it involves kind of doing a bunch of stuff in a big hurry and then holding up in a room for literally 20 minutes of real time.
Yeah.
I think the way that it played out for me was I was able to stay on the battlements for like again 10 real time minutes. Vice warp mode helped me a little bit here, and then you had to run down to the basement to to kind of hole up for a while. And then like yeah, once it's down to a few minutes left on the clock, you can wander out and then have the final showdown with Macduff, and you get like 20 seconds of real time to resolve this. And the trick, much as there's a trick in the original story, Macbeth has been told that no man of woman born can slay him. And Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped, delivered via cesarean, so he is able to kill Macbeth. They use a sort of a similar trick in that apparently Macduff has sworn that he is only there to fight Macbeth. So the solution to alter Macbeth's fate and create a different ending than that Shakespeare gives us is to give the special Macduff slaying claymore to Seaton earlier in the game, and then when Macduff shows up, you have to quickly summon Seaton and have Seaton kill Macduff, and that works. So you get a little congratulations message at the end. You get a secret code number. There's apparently supposed to be something that you can unlock if you have the code numbers from all of the four games, but I didn't even find where to enter that,
Huh.
let alone where all the numbers were. Or you can just have Macduff show up and if you mistype something, if the 20 seconds elapse,
Yeah.
he kills you, and it's essentially the same ending as the play. I felt like they could have done a little bit more with sort of celebrating or chastising you for changing history. But obviously the intention is for you to quote win the game, even though that's not the story of Shakespeare's Macbeth.
So the manual even says that you're on rails. You can't die, right? Because you have to be able to get to the end of the story. However, they said it's only in part 4 that you can change Macbeth's fate.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that sort of
Yeah.
signaled to you early on.
Although yeah, Lady Macbeth can get killed again by that mandrake. There are
Yes.
definitely other ways to be done in, but Macbeth. This
Macbeth.
was the first commercial game, and we'll talk about Avon in a minute, where it existed before Macbeth, but it was not really a mainstream product until some years after. This game first coming out in 1984, broader worldwide release a couple of years later. Yeah, I've wondered for a while, why didn't we see more Shakespeare-based games? Great public domain properties, exciting action, interesting characters, and maybe this is the answer, unfortunately, that people knew about this game and did not want to have more of it.
Hmm. That seems likely.
Sorry about that, Nick. This
That's
was
all
my
right.
idea. I got us into this. I do genuinely recommend taking a look at this. If for nothing else, then be careful about getting too literal about your source material. There were exciting, interesting things that could have happened here, but some things just went sideways.
There are lessons to be learned.
Lessons to be learned. That was Macbeth. And now we move to Avon, published by Topologika. This was a game that was developed at Cambridge in the early 80s. Dr. Jonathan Partington is credited with the design on this. So it was, much like the early American text adventures of the 1970s. If you were in the university scene, had access to mainframes, got the cool tapes from the kids and installed them on your machine at work. If you had that access, you could play these games. And it wasn't until some years later that they got home computer releases. This game was released as a double pack with Monsters of Murdak, another game from those academic origins in 1989. Very UK-centric set of platform releases. It was out for Spectrum, CPC, BBC Micro and Electron, Amstrad PCW, Acorn 32-bit, and MS-DOS. But unlike Macbeth, no support for Commodore 64, no Amiga, no Atari of any flavor. As I was researching this game, I did come across an interview with the head of Topologika, who was addressing the lack of support for Amiga and Atari ST, basically saying, our games are all text. We don't think that Amiga and ST owners want to buy all text games, but no real justification for why, like, the Macintosh wasn't supported, which, yes, was it was a graphical user interface platform, but in 1989, we're really talking about primarily black and white, things here. Text only stuff did just fine on that market. No Apple II, no C64, so that was a little surprising. I chose to play this. As I mentioned earlier, there was a preservation project some time ago where the original source code had been released for the adventure system called TSAL. There's a converter that converts it into Inform 6 code, which then means it can be compiled to the Infocom Z machine, Z machine. And I chose to play it in a world that didn't exist. I brought it into the Osmu interpreter. I played it on Vice on the Commodore 128, just to kind of get that 80-column feel, what could have been but wasn't. What did you play Avon on?
Oh, that's lovely. I wish I'd thought to do that. No, I played it in DOSBox because that was the easiest access to a copy that I could find.
Yeah.
And it was pretty quick to just fire up a DOSBox instance. I wish I'd thought of that because then I would have had much more luxurious access to things like scrollback buffers. Because the 128 Osmu scrollback is rather nice.
Yeah. So the DOS version did not have scrollback convenience for you?
Alas, no.
Okay. First, I was just going to play it on, Frotz or whatever, but I'm like, no, let's see what this could have been. So this game, Macbeth, we mentioned, its main feely, browsy was the heavily essayed version of the text that was seemingly prepared just for that game. This one has the letter from an American tourist who's in England visiting his aunt and uncle, and also going on a bit of a Shakespeare-themed tour. I found the fact that he was an American interesting. I'm not sure that paid off, so it may have just been to create a fish out of water feel. Did you get a sense, being an American in Britain yourself, did any of it ring true or false for you?
It's funny because the other American in London story that we play a lot is, of course, Trinity, where I feel that really does come through. The fact that you're an American becomes important in that story. And I felt like for this one, no, it was just player insert in a sort of wonderland of, Shakespeare elements that I think could have been any character, really.
And as I read the letter, it was interesting. At first, I'm like, okay, this feels like American phrasing. And then it said, I may have made a wrong turning. And I'm like, nope, that's not American phrasing. It's creating this fish out of water sense. The idea is that you're having a jolly time as a tourist, and then suddenly you feel that you've been displaced in time and space. You are standing on a literal stage, but the world has changed. It's kind of this, like you said, Wonderland, sideways, Shakespearean character infused land. You end up journeying through three different periods in time, which the world behaves slightly differently, and there are different puzzles or ways of accessing things as you go through those three different time periods. Once again, I did find it interesting that this game also starts with the flavor of Macbeth. Again, this was developed before the Oxford Digital Macbeth that we just played, but it was commercially published well after. So right nearby that stage you start on, there's Birnam Wood, there's Three Weird Sisters, and they're offering you a choice of objects to help you on your journey, which is the first place that this notoriously unflinchingly difficult game can send you down the wrong path.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I jumped in right off the bat and just thought, well, I'll pick the one that is the most interesting to me, I guess, because I don't see anything guiding me as to which I should choose. And so I chose the Wool of Bat, which apparently was the wrong
That
choice
would be the
for a first
wrong
playthrough.
choice. Yes, you'll
Yeah.
you'll need that later. But yes, I grabbed the Toa frog because I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting. I'll bring that along. But no, then the world suddenly gets pitch dark. You are not eaten by a Gru. You don't fall down a pit. But most areas then don't have a description. Amusingly, the travel text, at least in the informed conversion, would still play. So I'm like wandering around pitch dark, and then it would say like, okay, you crossed the ice floe. It's 50, it's 50 yards long or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay, that's good to know. But yes, I did eventually. I'm like, should this be happening? Should I be? And like, no, you need to get the Eye of Newt, you dummy, and then you'll have enough light to see by. I'm like, okay, thank you. Um,
Yeah.
this game, we mentioned that in Macbeth, the utility of things like examine or look at is pretty limited. You don't usually get good information out of it. This game just outright chides you about it. It says this is not one of those games where you have to go around examining everything. You've already had a full description of that. So sometimes a toe of frog is just a toe of frog. And in a sense, I do know what they're pushing back against. Like I've found in some neo-retro games that I've played over the past few years, there is kind of this samey rhythm you get into where you encounter an object, you examine the object, you get a pretty strong hint about what that object is going to be used for. So great, then apply that object to the other object that you've just included that you're supposed to use it for, and that you kind of rinse and repeat over and over. So I guess I did. I appreciated their firm stance on the matter, I guess. Sometimes I'd like a little more flavor, but I understood where they were coming from. How did you feel about sort of the level of description, immersion, detail that we got, both just in isolation and compared to Macbeth?
Well, I've got to say, it felt like a breath of fresh air after Macbeth. Definitely far more description going on, even when it was terse. The thing I loved about it was that if you tried to look at something, it would say, "Look in this game is only used intransitively," which feels like, I guess that the developers had a post office box in Peterborough, so I'm assuming this is out of
Yeah,
Cambridge
yeah.
somewhere. So yeah, that's that's some Cambridge Don trying to trying to scold a pupil. But yeah, definitely had a lot more text, had a lot more going on than Macbeth, but still, yeah, not to the level of the standard that we come to expect from, say, an Infocom game or an IF Renaissance, an Inform Renaissance game, where you could expect to have, we've come to insist that in the 21st century, all of our new games that we produce, all items have to have a description that at least gives the player some idea of how relevant the object is. And, if we use a word in a description, it should also be understood by the parser. This is definitely before that time.
Yeah. But that said, I like the writing, like I said, massive breath of fresh air. Yes, this game, it delves into its own sense of humor, and humor is always subjective. But compared to when that was going on in Macbeth, which again was trying to portray itself as you are, one of these anti-heroes, you are doing these things, and then you get the magic newspaper. This by establishing itself as you're in a sideways world, you're not necessarily strictly in any one place and time, as we find when Illyria Court is sort of this little side branch where 5 characters from Twelfth Night live. Like that's okay. There you're not meant to take it too literally. But yeah, I liked moving from place to place. Yes, some areas it was just like you are on an east-west passage. Like, all right, fine. But when we got to sort of a real destination, felt like I was pretty well rewarded. I was doing a little bit of tracking here as we went along because in my spare time, in addition to running Retro Adventurers, I do also run an amateur theater company that focuses on Shakespeare and other classic works. So like, which characters in these games have I actually played? And so I have played the Thane of Cawdor and Malvolio, who is kind of he may or may not appear based on the randomization of the game, but you can go into his home in Illyria Court. And that was my first death in this game. I had to restart because I couldn't see anything. But my first death was when I wandered into Malvolio's house and it said I was killed by the man traps that were set there. And I said, well, that's reasonably on brand for Malvolio. So That was
Yes,
all right.
indeed.
We mentioned the Macbeth tie-in, finding a dagger, which you see before you, which is the way they described it. There's this laundry basket, which for me, just seeing it, I'm like, is this going to be the thing which your aunt gave you, which you don't know what it is? And it is. The laundry basket is a thing which you put a bunch of things in to keep them out of sight and keep them from bumping up against your inventory limit. It looked like the basket ops were a little bit different in the official releases than in the Inform edition. In the Inform edition, I couldn't directly put something into the basket. I had to like open the basket, and then it says like, "Are you holding something you want to put in here?" Yes. What is it? And then say what it is, or get in yourself, which was an interesting yes/no question to ask, kind of
Yeah.
tipping off like, okay, I guess that'll come in handy later.
Yeah, the DOS version worked that way as
Okay.
well. So which leads me to wonder if perhaps later versions of the game worked that way and the Inform version you found was based on a later
Yeah,
edition,
unclear. It seemed like the
possibly.
Inform version was based on the original mainframe source code, so they may have. But so
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
but you're playing the DOS version, which would have
Maybe
been
they put it
the later
back.
one.
Yeah, I have to ask, do you suspect that the laundry basket was a reference to Cymbeline or
Oh, I hadn't even thought about it. I just thought it was
okay.
we need to put something in the world that is not too distracting. But yeah, that could be.
I
They went deep in the canon for some of the references here, so that
yeah.
definitely could have been.
I haven't played many Shakespeare parts in my time, mostly in high school, but around 2007, 2008, we did go on a completist quest when we freshly moved to
Hmm.
London. And so we did see the Trevor Nunn production of Cymbeline, which was amazing and manages to be, I think, very much like this game, Shakespeare doing Shakespeare.
Mm.
A lot of elements from other plays that you kind of know. There are sleeping drafts and there are poisons and there are mistaken identities and there are, all kinds of other things that happen that all come together into one plot. And so that's I always have a soft spot for Cymbeline, and so I always think about that getting sneaked in with the laundry basket.
Interesting. Yeah, I it completely
Yeah.
went past me. Oh, speaking of Americanisms versus Britishisms, I did notice because there's a physical calendar that tells you the date in the game. That's helpful as you speaking of sleeping drafts as you move through time. But I did notice that it said January 6th, and I wrote not 6th January.
That is
Yeah.
interesting. I hadn't noticed that myself. It didn't occur to me. I mean, I have to encounter dates in so many formats, but yeah, that does seem odd. I'll have to check and see if that's what it was in the DOS version now, because I'll have to go back and play it now. The one thing I will say is that those three dates that you can play on are, of course, Twelfth Night, the Ides of March, and Midsummer.
Of course. I did not
Yeah.
sit down to map them
So
out, but of
yeah,
course.
they're all references to dates that were actually formidable, parts of individual
Yeah.
plays.
Now, we should say, like, Macbeth sets out at the outset, they're like, here's the play. We're going to need you to know things about the play. They're very, clear about that to the extent that they are, being very picky about you applying, language that's directly from the play. We can argue about that. Avon tried to have it both ways. They tried to say,
Mm,
well, the scenarios are based in Shakespeare, but the solutions aren't. And I'm like, really? Really? Because you encounter this lifelike full size statue of a woman, and you're just supposed to know to kiss it. Like so, you either need Winter's Tale
yeah.
knowledge or you just want to kiss statues.
or Galatea, I guess,
Mm,
which was what that section of A Winter's Tale was in reference to. Yeah, that definitely felt funny. And yet there were also some puzzles that were absolutely baffling. For example, you had to put on a ruff or a collar in order to survive your first encounter with Othello, which felt a little bit tone deaf to me. You mentioned the dagger. Of course, that dagger is important. I think it's interesting that you criticized Macbeth for being a little too literal about some slightly metaphorical speech, and yet the literal dagger in this one, it does kind of get a pass, because I think it fits in better with the setting as being a little bit more
yes.
playful and a little bit more traditional text adventure. sort of collection quest kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
that felt
Particularly when you've got the laundry
Yeah,
basket.
that to me, that felt like a riff. That was like, okay, set your
Yeah,
expectations for what this world's going to be like. Now, the fact that when you just encounter a random Scotsman who's meant to be Banquo, that you're just supposed to kill him, like that's like, really? All right. And sure, that Othello's one job in the play is to show up and try to, throttle you. Like, yes, like,
yeah.
could we have done better with some of these concepts? Yeah, probably. Going back to the statue, because like when I saw, I'm like, all right, we're going to kiss the statue. I'm like, well, what happens if I interact with this statue in other ways? And I don't know if you tried something like this. I haven't tried it in one of the official releases, but at least in the informed parser version, when I tried to touch statue, I got, what do you want to do with the touch? And I think that was a clash with there's later a touchstone that is a
Of
treasure. So I'm
course.
like, oh, okay, we're getting a clash on that. But that I thought was a little bit interesting, and I wonder if the official version had the same clash there.
That's a pity because in that scene, it is described that the king touches the statue's skin and says that it feels warm.
Yeah, yeah, some
So
missed
yeah, that
opportunities.
that is an interesting oversight.
The the fact that you play the Porsche casket game three times in
Oh my god.
all three of the dates, that's sort of interesting. I did notice like there were some definitely tricky puzzles here. Some that you just kind of had to, all right, what could possibly prevent me from being throttled by Othello? Well, there's this collar here, and then yes, the collar ends up blocking his grip. So okay, fine.
Oh, it was a clerical collar. That was
Yes,
it.
which
Sorry.
they then describe as a dog
Yeah.
collar, which
Which is the slang term for it.
I
Yes.
figured that was what was happening there. Yeah. But then there were other things where, the designers were saying like, well, there's going to be a trick to this. Like there's three mazes and there's a trick to each of the mazes. And the casket game is there's a trick to each of those where you encounter a code word and then that tells you the order in which you're supposed to open the casket. It's like, okay, once we know the trick, we're gonna watch for the trick. We're gonna do the trick. You want to talk about the mazes?
Oh, the mazes. This is actually what ultimately
Did you
drove me
in?
not to
Okay.
finish. Was I think the Cassandra maze. There was some guidance on how to defeat the Cassandra maze, and yet I tripped over it enough times that I at some point just said, you know what, I had fun with this game. It's fine. I don't need to actually get to the end. The Cassandra maze. The trick is that Cassandra comes up and gives you a portent of
Yep.
doom, and of course, Cassandra's curse in the Iliad and in Troilus and Cressida is that she will accurately predict calamity, but also that she must never be
Right.
believed. And so that's I wasn't sure when she first appeared. I'm like, wait a minute, am I supposed to believe her or not?
Okay. Interesting.
And so the first time I thought, oh, obviously I must lean into the curse, right, to progress this story along. And sure enough, she was
Yeah.
correct, which I should have realized because that is the other part of the curse, is that she is deathly accurate. In if she tells you you're going to die, you might not believe it, but you're going to die. So yeah, the trick is she shows up to sort of warn you back that you're about to go down the wrong way in this
Yes.
maze, and you're meant to kind of hew in one direction most of the time, which I think is where I tended to get
Okay.
lost.
Yeah. Yeah. The trick to the maze, for those of you who haven't played yet, you're on a mountain path, and you can go. It's always northwest or northeast. And yes, if you go up one and Cassandra shows up, you're meant to backtrack and go the other way. And this is random with each playthrough. There's some kind of snarky notes in the materials. There's also we mentioned in Macbeth, there's no save load whatsoever. In
No,
the
none.
original, I did not see because I was playing on an emulator and I took, availed myself of save states, but I didn't see if they adhered to this in the informed version. But in
So
the Topologika releases,
yeah.
they disable saves or they ruin games if you save at certain points. Like it's got that player hostility going.
Yeah. So I believe what happened was, and I sort of ran across this a couple times, at least in the DOS version I was playing. If you saved, so if you encountered a clue and then you saved, it would assume that you were somehow trying to cheat the
Yeah.
system and avoid having to understand this clue. And so it would change the clue on reload. It would re-randomize
Yeah.
things. So you could get a clue, go, great, I've made progress, write down a note for the clue, save it, go and give the puzzle solution, and it just wouldn't work because it had changed it on restore.
Yeah, I avoided that with the way that I played it, but there was a definite
Yeah,
culture of being hostile. So yes, the mazes are all random, and there's this trick. So yes, the Cassandra one, you're meant to just backtrack and go the other direction. Eventually, at the top of the path, you get a signed copy of the Iliad, which is a fun treasure for the setting. And then basically, Cassandra's at both of those pathways, both the one that has the Iliad and the one that doesn't. So it's like,
yeah.
okay, we're done here. We're meant to come back down. Did you get to either of the other two mazes? Okay.
No, I didn't. That was the one that
So there's
did me
another
in.
maze that essentially is just solved by having a scroll with you. You read the scroll and it tells you basically there's a little passage on it that magically changes depending on where you are. And the word north, south, east, or west appears in the passage on the scroll, and you're meant to just go that way. So that one's all right. You know the trick. You just read scroll and you go in that direction. The one that very nearly did me in, I actually did bail on the game. I went ahead and I just watched the last like 7 minutes of a walkthrough video, and then I said, "All right, I'll go back to this one more time because I do want to encounter these last few puzzles for myself." Is the Rosalind maze, and this one very nearly made me, throw the laptop kind of thing.
All right.
Yeah,
Before you say anything, I have to guess. Is it that you have to choose which path is Rosalind and which is Rosalind?
no, that would be funny. But it is Rosalind each time, and you're in the forest of Arden, and basically you step in to the maze, and the first one says you're in the forest. Attached high on a tree is a note that read emblazoned Rosalind. So the idea from there is you pick a direction to go in the maze. And if you're on the correct path, which again is randomized each time, you will see another one of these notes. If you don't, it says you're lost in the forest. And then you can it basically like kicks you back to the beginning after a little bit of wandering, being, quote, lost in the forest. So you have to just iterate through this and find which the correct paths are. And in my playthrough, I think it was 6 steps through, but getting through each of those. And I swear the last time for that last step where you're meant to then find somebody sleeping in a clearing and you give them the code word. There's a lot of code words going on in this game, but I was stuck on that one. And I swear I tried all 8 directions and just did not get through. And that's where I saved the state and kind of threw up my hands. I eventually went back and did luck out. But that one was frustrating because like, yes, we know the trick, but iterating through it, because you get lost, you have to wander back to the start of the maze, do the steps that then iterate through the last one. It got pretty tedious. So good on you for not playing that one.
Yeah, I mean, especially with saves clearly contraindicated by
Yeah.
this game, even if they are available. I think, yeah, dealing with mazes after all this time, it's a bit like also back in Macbeth, dealing with waiting 20 real-time minutes to get to a part of the game to figure out if you've already set yourself up for success or not. It can be pretty frustrating.
And there was another puzzle late in the game that again was one of those like, whoa, like not only was it I would say reasonably deep Shakespeare cut. Yes, it was from Hamlet, but um, it was not a metaphor that I would think of. Basically, there's a colossus lurking around. You have to shoot him with an arrow, but you have to shoot the arrow not from an area where the colossus is described, but from an area where there's a house that's described as having, like a cutout in it, and that this is a reference to Hamlet talking about like I have fired my arrow over my house and killed my brother. Kind of as everything's popping off at the end there in Act 5, and like short of just trying to fire it everywhere, that was a really deep cut. And again, like you would think of shooting an arrow at a thing when that thing is described, not from a neighboring area.
Yeah, that seems like a real stretch.
It was.
I found puzzles that I think when the King Lear puzzle in particular, you had to choose which of his
Yep.
daughters. And the clue that I got was King Lear shall pick one girl, which I immediately brushed off. Like, yeah, there's definitely stuff in Lear about loyalties, but fighting loyalties between his daughters. I get it. And the thing I was meant to pick up on is the fact that one girl is an anagram of
Yep.
Goneril,
Yep.
which, okay, fine. If and again, I can imagine if you're in in the mainframe in the university and you've got a dozen kids all playing in the same lab at the same terminal set, all chatting around, or if this is something where you go and you poke around it a little bit every weekend over the course of a term, yeah, you might see multiple clues go by. You might have conversations about this, and it might be a little less unfair. But this definitely, it just bounced right off
Yeah,
of
I
me.
got anger.
Um,
I was making notes of these
mm,
obvious code words as I was going along. But right, well, he sure is angry. So yeah, like whether they were aware of the potential for confusion or were leaning into it, unclear. These Phoenix Topologika games definitely have a reputation for unflinching difficulty, and this is actually considered one of the easier ones. So yes,
yeah,
you get these anagram clues. Like I said, there's the triple trick on doing Porsche's challenge.
there are letter substitution
Yep,
ciphers.
yep. For the
There are a lot of code words where you don't actually have to solve the cipher, but you have to notice that the pattern of repeated letters and the length of a word matches
yeah,
something
that
else.
was the which
Um,
of Othello's which of the Illyrians were Othello's
yeah,
contact, the one room you could go
yeah,
into and not be killed. Yeah, the other really difficult and kind of sideways and not especially Shakespearean reference was at one point you get put in jail and
yeah.
there's no exits. Did you get to this one?
Yeah, you have to tell him that you like Arn, basically.
Yeah, so you hear Rule Britannia being sung, and the way you're supposed to iterate through this is that if you give Rule Britannia as a command, the game's like, oh yes, let me give you what we would later call a Wikipedia entry on Rule Britannia, and it gives you the origin and the composer and the lyricist, and yes, I believe if you just give the composer as a code phrase,
Yeah.
then you're released. That was a little rough.
So yeah, I mean the clue is if music be the food of love, play on, which I have a heavily rhotic accent, so that doesn't really work for me. But
Mm.
yeah, if you're growing up in Cambridgeshire and you're playing this game, it will sound similar. Arn on. Yeah, it's
Hearing it
fine.
explained, it all is all quite clear. Ultimately, this is a treasure collect game. It's one of those where you get to the end and your score is based on some completion bonus plus do you have all of the treasures. Um, I don't know if you were taking score frequently, and again, I'm playing the informed version, which is based on the mainframe code, but at least in the mainframe version, it's doing that thing that Zork and Adventure and so forth would do, where it gives you a rank based on your score. But in the mainframe version, your rank is Thane of Cawdor unless you score the maximum number of points, and then like, oh, you're the king now. Did you happen to catch that in the release version?
Oh, I didn't note down what my titles were, but I did have the score going in a status bar along the top next to the location
Yeah,
at all
yeah.
times, which was, I could have hoped for more useful information sometimes, but
So
yeah.
if you've got all the treasures at the end, you're like, great, you've got the maximum number of points, you get the top score. Interestingly, the game never really attempts to answer, is this real? How did you end up here? How are you going to get out? You kind of just you defeat the final foozle. There's a guard, guarding a gate, and it's kind of implied that past that gate, not only are all of the characters from the game there to congratulate you, but after that you'll be free to resume your normal life. Which I guess by from the browsy that's included, the letter to the aunt and uncle, this is related as a thing that had happened. So we at least know that in the world of the documentation, the protagonist has survived this game and gone on to live a happy life. This was
Excellent.
our first take on Topologika. Did you have any kind of big picture observations on the game, the style? Would you want to come back to these guys in the future?
So I'm curious how many of these games are based on sort of your mini computer mainframe size projects, and how many of them. Yeah, I'm curious to see what. Obviously, it sounds like some more of the other ones are harder. I wonder if they might be smaller, perhaps as a result, because typically the sort of sprawling nature of some of these games, at least for their time, tended to come from the fact that your mainframe had more storage space and more RAM, even if it had sort of a slower processor per user. Yeah, I might be interested in seeing another one. I think especially since obviously this was the palate cleanser for me from Macbeth. So not to put too much shade on Macbeth, but I think this definitely, if you were to ask me which one I'd want to see more of, it would definitely be this. more
both
Topologika.
of the development teams, have pretty deep sets of credits. Now, the Oxford Digital people responsible for Macbeth, they go on to do some fairly prosaic games in the future. I guess that's where the money was. But yeah, there's a pretty deep Topologica catalog as well. So the long and the short of it is, I unfortunately think I sort of have my answer on why we didn't see more Shakespeare games. Yeah, a little surprised. I think overall Avon did a nice job of, you're not bound to using Shakespearean verse to solve problems. Yes, there are some things that are definitely rooted in those stories. And again, we talked about quite a few of the plays are represented in the puzzles and in the solutions, but you don't have to be conjugating like it's 1600 in order to solve the problems, which definitely was the case in Macbeth. But yeah, for whatever reason, these two kind of represent the peak output for what if you were a both a text adventurer and a Shakespeare head. These were it in that period. We do later see Graham Nelson did an adaptation under a pseudonym of The Tempest. There's certainly a lot
The
of other
Tempest,
games
yes.
that have taken inspiration since then, but this was uh, this was the world that was. So
Have you played The
I played
Tempest?
it a little bit. I sort of got frustrated early on. I'm like, I'll come back to this later. It was one of the games that I was
Yeah.
fooling around with when I was helping test Osmo when it was in its earlier development phases. Because I was just like, okay, what informed six titles can we throw at this thing, and how well will they play? Informally, how did you find it?
So that is definitely The Tempest. We're talking about Graham Nelson's story. That very much was trying to be a literal replay of The Tempest itself. I believe the conceit was that the player is Prospero, and then the agent within the game is Ariel or
Mm,
Caliban. I think it's Ariel. And the parser itself had been updated so that you mentioned not having to use Elizabethan or Tudor era speech to try and control the game. The Tempest, I remember getting a little bit into that. I played it around 2000 or so when it was only a few years old, and it was definitely notable for the fact that the error messages all came out in Shakespearean
yes.
verse, which was very. I think that was a very Graham Nelson conceit at the time. He'd produced Curses was the big game that he sort of one of the things that helped push along the
Yeah,
informed
that sort of kicked it
Renaissance.
off. Like, look,
And
here's my
yeah,
proof of concept. This will work,
yeah,
guys, and it sure did.
and that itself was full of literary references and T.S. Eliot and Blake and all these other great English writers. So I do feel like that was sort of in keeping with where he was experimenting in the 90s, and I think it gets kind of panned these days, even though it was an extremely interesting technical experiment for the day.
Yeah, I do remember that, it's not one of the higher rated games from his output, certainly, but right, that it was trying to do something that others hadn't taken on, and really, what would it mean to have an immersive parser experience like it's 1610?
Yeah, but unfortunately, it was a little bit on rails as well. So
Which is a challenge with some of these established stories. But I really, well, did I enjoy myself? I enjoyed peeling the onion on these two games. Avon, I would definitely recommend that people take a look at. I think the writing is clever. I think the handling of certain puzzles and kind of there's a trick to these mazes, and we're going to do them anyway. That was it was a nice way to approach the market. Macbeth, boy, I'd love to play that Lady Macbeth adventure with a little bit of modern styling and a little bit more sensible puzzle design. Nick, your final thoughts on our Shakespearean adventure?
well, I have to concur with you. I think, yeah, Macbeth was frustrating in almost all ways. The graphics were interesting. There were some interesting ideas in there that I think could possibly be given another shot by a modern developer. For Avon, I just had so much fun just romping around, exploring, drawing my maps, and marking little characters and leaving notes. That I think, even though I didn't get particularly far, I think I only had about 230 points in the end. I still definitely enjoyed myself, and don't consider it time wasted.
For Nick Moffat, this is Jason Compton, thanking you for joining us on another episode of The Retro Adventurers.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to The Retro Adventurers, a podcast about classic text adventure games. This episode was produced and edited by Jason Compton. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, including Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Podcast Addict. Visit us at retroadventurers.com and follow us on Facebook and Blue Sky. The Retro Adventurers is based on a format originally devised by Ben Collier, Jason Compton, and Dave Hawkins.